This video examines published sources for educational purposes. Interpretations are attributed. No claims are asserted as fact without citation. Summer of 1943. A Luftwaffe base somewhere in occupied France. German fighter ace Major Klaus Meech stood beside his sleek Messerschmitt Bf 109, watching as intelligence officers pinned photographs to the briefing room wall. The images showed a massive American fighter that dwarfed everything the Germans had seen before. At over 17,000 pounds fully loaded, this new aircraft was nearly twice the weight of a Spitfire and 50% heavier than the celebrated P-51 Mustang. The German pilots gathered around the photographs, pointing and laughing at what appeared to be an oversized, ungainly machine that violated every principle of fighter design they had learned. According to surviving Luftwaffe records from 1943, German pilots initially dismissed the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt as too large and cumbersome to pose a serious threat in aerial combat. One captured German pilot reportedly told his American interrogators that the aircraft looked more like a flying bathtub than a fighter plane. The conventional wisdom among experienced Luftwaffe pilots suggested that larger aircraft were inherently slower and less maneuverable, making them easy targets for Germany's battle-tested fighters that had dominated European skies since 1940. Before we uncover today's secret from World War II, if you enjoy exploring the hidden stories and overlooked battles of history, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more untold wartime histories. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always amazed that these memories of the past connect us across so many corners of the world. What these German pilots couldn't have anticipated was that they were looking at what would become one of the most feared aircraft in the European theatre. The P-47 Thunderbolt would go on to destroy more Luftwaffe aircraft than any other Allied fighter, claiming 3,572 confirmed aerial victories, according to official US Army Air Force's records. But in those early days of 1943, as German pilots prepared for their first encounters with this American giant, confidence remained high that their superior training and nimble aircraft would easily handle whatever the Americans could throw at them. The initial German assessment wasn't entirely unreasonable. Historical records indicate that the P-47C model, which first arrived in the European theatre of operations in early 1943, measured nearly 41 feet in length and had a wingspan of over 40 feet. By comparison, the Messerschmitt Bf 109G that formed the backbone of the Luftwaffe fighter force was just 29 feet long, with a wingspan of 32 feet. The size difference was immediately apparent to anyone who saw the two aircraft side by side. Designer Alexander Kartveli himself reportedly acknowledged the aircraft's imposing dimensions, noting in company documents that while it was a nice airplane, it was undeniably too large compared to its contemporaries. Photographs from Republic Aviation Corporation archives show technicians working on P-47s appearing almost childlike next to the massive fighter, emphasizing just how substantial this aircraft was by conventional standards. The German pilots' initial mockery intensified when they learned about the Thunderbolt's empty weight of over 10,000 pounds. Luftwaffe training manuals from the period emphasized the importance of power-to-weight ratios and maneuverability in aerial combat. According to these doctrines, a heavier fighter would inevitably be slower to accelerate, climb, and turn, creating disadvantages that skilled German pilots could easily exploit. Flight Lieutenant Werner Schröer, a decorated Luftwaffe ace with over 100 victories, reportedly expressed typical German sentiment when he first encountered intelligence reports about the P-47. According to post-war interviews conducted by military historians, Schröer noted that American aircraft designers seemed to prioritize brute force over finesse, creating what he characterized as flying trucks rather than true fighters. This dismissive attitude extended throughout the Luftwaffe command structure. Intelligence reports from the German Air Ministry in 1943 categorized the P-47 as a heavy fighter more suitable for bomber interception than air-to-air combat with single-engine fighters. Some German analysts compared it unfavorably to their own twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf 110, which had already proven vulnerable to nimble single-engine fighters during the Battle of Britain. The psychological advantage that German pilots enjoyed cannot be understated. By 1943, the Luftwaffe had accumulated years of combat experience across multiple theaters. Veterans of the Spanish Civil War, the Battle of France, and the early stages of the Eastern Front brought hard-won knowledge about aerial tactics and aircraft performance. Many German pilots had already engaged American P-40 Warhawks and P-38 Lightnings with mixed but generally favorable results, reinforcing their confidence in German aircraft and training superiority. Major Gunther Roll, who would finish the war as the third highest scoring fighter ace in history, with 275 confirmed victories, later described the initial German reaction to American fighters in memoirs published decades after the war. According to Roll's account, experienced German pilots viewed each new American aircraft type as simply another variant of the same fundamental problem: heavy machines flown by inexperienced pilots who relied on numerical superiority rather than skill and tactics. This confidence was bolstered by early engagement reports from the spring of 1943. According to Luftwaffe combat records preserved in German military archives, initial encounters between German fighters and P-47s seemed to confirm their preconceptions. The Thunderbolts appeared sluggish in turning fights and seemed to avoid prolonged engagements, often breaking off combat to return to their bombers, rather than pressing attacks against German interceptors. What German pilots didn't immediately recognize was that American tactics were evolving based on careful analysis of the P-47's unique capabilities. U.S. Army Air Force's training manuals from 1943 instructed Thunderbolt pilots to avoid turning fights with more maneuverable German fighters, instead emphasizing hit-and-run tactics that exploited the American aircraft's superior high-altitude performance and diving speed. The fundamental misunderstanding went deeper than simple aircraft performance metrics. German fighter doctrine, refined through years of successful combat, emphasized close-in dogfighting, where superior pilot skill and aircraft agility determined outcomes. This approach had worked brilliantly against early war opponents, whose aircraft and tactics were relatively similar to German methods. However, according to analysis by aviation historian William Green, the Americans were developing an entirely different approach to air combat. Rather than trying to outturn German fighters, American doctrine focused on using superior firepower, altitude advantage, and coordinated tactics to overwhelm individual German aircraft before they could bring their maneuverability advantages into play. The P-47's armament represented a quantum leap in fighter firepower that German intelligence initially failed to fully appreciate. While Luftwaffe fighters typically carried 2 or 3 machine guns supplemented by 1 or 2 cannons, the Thunderbolt mounted .850 caliber machine guns with a combined firing rate that could deliver significant damage in short bursts. Contemporary German aircraft like the Bf 109G carried one 30mm cannon and two 13mm machine guns, providing excellent hitting power but with limited ammunition capacity. The Focke-Wulf 190A, considered by many historians to be the finest German fighter of the war, typically mounted 4 20mm cannons and 2 machine guns, offering superior firepower to the Messerschmitt, but still carrying significantly less ammunition than the American fighter. According to technical specifications preserved in Republic Aviation archives, a fully loaded P-47 carried 3,400 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition, allowing for approximately 30 seconds of continuous firing. By comparison, German fighters typically carried enough ammunition for only 10 to 15 seconds of sustained fire, forcing pilots to carefully choose their shots and break off attacks to conserve ammunition for multiple engagements. The psychological impact of this firepower disparity would soon become apparent to German pilots who survived their first encounters with Thunderbolts. Post-war interviews with Luftwaffe veterans consistently described the intense concentration of P-47 gun attacks. with many noting that the volume of tracers resembled anti-aircraft fire more than typical fighter armament. Oberleutnant Johannes Steinhoff, a highly decorated German ace who commanded fighter units throughout the war, later wrote in his memoirs about the evolution of American fighter tactics. According to Steinhoff's account, German pilots initially viewed American fighters as individually inferior but dangerous in large formations. This seemed to hold true during early encounters with P-47s, which typically operated in squadron strength formations rather than the smaller flights preferred by German fighters. The stage was set for a dramatic shift in the air war over Europe. German pilots, confident in their aircraft and experience, prepared to engage what they viewed as another clumsy American fighter. American pilots, flying the most heavily armed and robust fighter aircraft ever built, were developing tactics specifically designed to neutralize German advantages while exploiting their own aircraft's unique capabilities. Neither side fully understood what was about to unfold in the skies over occupied Europe. The German pilots who had laughed at photographs of the massive American fighter were about to discover that size and weight could be advantages rather than liabilities when properly applied. The Americans were about to prove that overwhelming firepower and tactical innovation could overcome traditional notions of fighter performance. The collision between these two philosophies of air combat would reshape the European air war and demonstrate that preconceptions about aircraft design could be dangerously misleading. The German pilots who had dismissed the P-47 Thunderbolt as a flying bathtub were about to learn a sobering lesson about the decisive impact of 850 caliber machine guns speaking in unison. The first major encounter between German pilots and P-47 Thunderbolts occurred on April 15, 1943, over the skies of Belgium. According to combat reports filed by the 4th Fighter Group, 12 P-47Cs were escorting B-17 flying fortresses when they encountered a formation of Messerschmitt Bf-109Gs from Jagdgeschwader 26. What happened next would begin to shatter German preconceptions about American fighter capabilities. Hauptmann Johannes Priller, commanding officer of the Thurs JG-26 and a veteran with over 100 victories, led the German formation in what he expected to be a routine interception. According to post-war interviews conducted by historian Johannes Steinhoff, Priller initially viewed the approaching P-47s as easy targets, noting their apparent reluctance to engage in turning combat. German tactical doctrine called for tight, climbing turns to force enemy fighters into energy-bleeding maneuvers where superior German pilot training could prevail. Lieutenant Colonel Don Blakesley, leading the American formation, had different plans. Following new tactical guidelines developed at the Fighter Command Headquarters, Blakesley instructed his pilots to maintain altitude advantage and use the P-47's superior diving speed to execute hit-and-run attacks. This approach contradicted everything German pilots expected from aerial combat, creating confusion in the Luftwaffe formation, as American fighters refused to be drawn into traditional dogfights. The engagement lasted only minutes, but its impact would reverberate throughout the Luftwaffe command structure. According to German loss records preserved in the Bundesarchiv, 2 Bf-109s were shot down in the initial encounter, with both pilots reporting heavy damage from what they described as unprecedented firepower concentration. Unteroffizier Klaus Weber, who survived his aircraft's breakup, later told interrogators that the American fighters' guns seemed to fire continuously, creating a wall of tracers unlike anything he had experienced. Weber's account, documented in Allied intelligence reports from 1943, described his surprise at the intensity of the P-47's armament. His Messerschmitt had absorbed multiple hits before critical systems failed, with the American pilot maintaining fire discipline that suggested abundant ammunition reserves. This contradicted German assumptions about American fighter capabilities and forced a reassessment of engagement tactics. The psychological impact of these early encounters extended beyond individual pilots to the broader Luftwaffe command structure. Major General Adolf Galland, who served as general of the fighter arm, noted in his post-war memoirs that reports of American fighters carrying unprecedented ammunition loads required immediate tactical adjustments. German pilots accustomed to brief, decisive engagements now faced opponents who could maintain sustained fire throughout extended combat. Flight training modifications implemented across Luftwaffe fighter schools in summer 1943 reflected this evolving threat assessment. According to documents from the German Air Ministry, new curriculum emphasized evasive maneuvers against high firepower opponents and stressed the importance of ammunition conservation during extended engagements. These changes represented a significant departure from previous training doctrine that had emphasized aggressive, close-range attacks. The technical specifications that German intelligence gradually compiled painted a disturbing picture of American industrial capability. Reports indicated that each P-47 carried more ammunition than entire German fighter flights combined, with individual aircraft capable of sustained fire lasting 30 seconds or more. For Luftwaffe pilots accustomed to carefully rationed ammunition loads, this represented a fundamental shift in aerial combat dynamics. Major Grasser, a technical officer with the German Air Ministry, compiled detailed analyses of captured American ammunition that revealed sophisticated manufacturing techniques. According to Grasser's reports, preserved in German military archives, American .50 caliber rounds demonstrated consistent quality and performance characteristics that exceeded German ammunition production standards. This technical superiority extended beyond mere quantity to encompass reliability and effectiveness factors that German pilots encountered in combat. The ballistic performance of American .50 caliber machine guns created specific tactical challenges for German pilots accustomed to different weapon systems. Unlike German cannon rounds that delivered strong individual hits, American machine gun fire created patterns that could systematically disable aircraft systems across extended engagements. Luftwaffe maintenance reports from mid-1943 documented increasing numbers of aircraft returning with multiple machine gun strikes rather than single cannon damage points. Oberleutnant Georg Schenker, a veteran pilot with JG-54, described in his combat diary the distinctive sound pattern of P-47 gun attacks. According to Schenker's account published in German aviation journals decades later, the 8-gun configuration created a characteristic buzzsaw effect that became psychologically intimidating for German pilots. This audio signature allowed experienced Luftwaffe veterans to identify P-47 attacks even when visual contact remained limited. The high-altitude performance characteristics of the P-47 created additional tactical complications for German interceptors. According to flight test data compiled by the Rechlin Test Center, German fighters experienced significant performance degradation above 25,000 feet, while intelligence reports suggested American Thunderbolts maintained combat effectiveness at altitudes exceeding 30,000 feet. This altitude advantage allowed P-47 formations to dictate engagement terms and break off combat when circumstances became unfavorable. Hauptmann Egon Meyer, commanding officer of the Tranche JG-2 and one of Germany's most successful bomber destroyers, noted in his tactical reports that American escort fighters increasingly operated at altitudes that challenged German interception capabilities. Meyer's analysis, preserved in Luftwaffe historical records, described how P-47 formations could maintain protective coverage over bomber streams while remaining beyond effective range of German fighters climbing to attack altitude. The mechanical reliability of American fighters created another source of German frustration. Combat reports from summer 1943 documented numerous instances where P-47s absorbed significant battle damage yet continued flying and fighting. Lieutenant Fritz Losigkeit, a pilot with JG-51, described in his post-war memoirs watching a P-47 absorb direct cannon hits that should have been mission-ending, only to see the American aircraft continue its attack run against German positions. These observations contradicted German technical assumptions about American manufacturing quality. Pre-war intelligence assessments had characterized American industry as quantity-focused rather than quality-oriented. suggesting that mass-produced aircraft would lack the durability of German precision engineering. The battlefield performance of P-47s forced German analysts to revise these assessments and acknowledge superior American manufacturing capabilities. The radial engine configuration of the P-47 provided inherent survivability advantages that German liquid-cooled engines could not match. According to technical analyses conducted by German aircraft manufacturers, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 could continue operating despite significant battle damage that would immediately disable German inline engines. This durability translated into tactical advantages, as P-47 pilots could press attacks longer and survive combat damage that would force German pilots to withdraw. Major Wilhelm Batz, a highly decorated German ace, later described his frustration with engaging P-47s that seemed resistant to standard fighter tactics. According to Batz's account, documented in aviation historian Tony Holmes's research, German pilots required significantly more ammunition to achieve decisive results against Thunderbolts compared to other Allied fighters. This ammunition expenditure created tactical dilemmas for German pilots who needed to engage multiple targets during bomber interception missions. The escort effectiveness of P-47 formations began to impact German bomber interception strategies by late summer 1943. Luftwaffe tactical manuals from this period emphasized avoiding direct engagement with escort fighters whenever possible, focusing instead on attacking bomber formations during brief windows when fighter coverage appeared limited. This defensive approach represented a significant departure from earlier aggressive tactics that had characterized German fighter operations. Oberst Hannes Trautloft, commanding officer of JG-54, noted in his unit diary that American escort fighters increasingly dominated airspace over bomber formations. Trautloft's observations, preserved in German military archives, described how P-47 formations maintained disciplined protective coverage that limited German interception opportunities. This tactical evolution forced German fighter units to develop new approaches for engaging heavily escorted bomber streams. The industrial implications of American fighter production became apparent as German intelligence compiled data on P-47 deployment rates. Reports indicated that Republic Aviation was producing Thunderbolts at unprecedented rates, with new aircraft arriving in the European theatre faster than German factories could replace combat losses. This production disparity created strategic implications that extended beyond individual aircraft performance characteristics. General Werner Kreiper, who served as chief of the General Staff of the Luftwaffe, later acknowledged in post-war interviews that American production capability represented a fundamental challenge to German air strategy. According to Kreiper's assessment, documented in military historian Richard Overy's research, German aircraft production could not match American output rates even under optimal circumstances. The P-47 represented not just a capable fighter aircraft, but a symbol of American industrial supremacy. The training implications of facing P-47s forced significant adjustments in German pilot preparation programs. Flight schools began emphasizing defensive tactics against high firepower opponents, teaching evasive maneuvers specifically designed to counter sustained machine gun attacks. These changes represented time and resources diverted from offensive training that had previously characterized German pilot preparation. Hauptmann Johannes Steinhoff noted in his tactical assessments that engaging P-47 formations required different energy management techniques compared to fighting other Allied fighters. According to Steinhoff's analysis, German pilots needed to maintain higher energy states throughout engagements to compensate for American altitude and speed advantages. This requirement created additional training burdens for already stretched German flight schools. The psychological warfare aspects of P-47 operations became increasingly apparent as German pilot morale reports documented growing respect for American fighter capabilities. Intelligence summaries from late 1943 indicate that German pilots no longer viewed American fighters as inferior opponents. but acknowledged their technical and tactical strengths. Lieutenant Erich Hartmann, who would become history's highest-scoring fighter ace, described in his memoirs the evolution of German attitudes toward American pilots. According to Hartmann's account, initial dismissiveness gave way to professional respect, as German pilots recognized that American fighters possessed significant capabilities when properly employed. This attitudinal shift represented a fundamental change in German tactical thinking about the air war over Europe. The turning point came during a massive air battle over Schweinfurt on October 14, 1943. According to official records from the 8th Air Force Historical Society, over 300 B-17 flying fortresses attempted to reach the ball-bearing factories that were critical to German war production. The Luftwaffe responded with unprecedented force, launching over 500 fighter sorties in what would become known as Black Thursday. Among the American escort fighters were squadrons of P-47 Thunderbolts, and what happened that day would forever change German perceptions of the massive American fighter. Oberst Egon Meyer, commanding Jagdgeschwader 2, had developed specialized tactics for attacking American bomber formations. According to military historian Donald Caldwell's research, Meyer's head-on attacks had proven highly effective against previous raids. However, on this October morning, Meyer encountered something different. The P-47 escort fighters didn't break away from the bombers as expected. Instead, they pressed their attacks with a ferocity that caught German pilots completely off guard. Major Francis Gabreski of the 56th Fighter Group spotted a Messerschmitt Bf-110 twin-engine fighter attempting to position itself for a bomber attack. According to Gabreski's combat report, filed with the 8th Air Force that evening, he opened fire at 700 yards with all 8 50 caliber machine guns. The volume of fire was so intense that the German aircraft came apart mid-air, forcing Gabreski to dive sharply to avoid colliding with the debris field. Minutes later, as documented in squadron records preserved at the Air Force Historical Research Agency, Gabreski engaged another Bf-110. The German pilot, perhaps recognizing the danger, attempted evasive maneuvers that had previously proven effective against other Allied fighters. However, the P-47's superior high-altitude performance allowed Gabreski to maintain pursuit. When he opened fire again, the concentrated firepower of 8 machine guns struck the German fighter at the wing root, causing critical damage that sent the aircraft descending in smoke. The psychological impact of these encounters rippled through German fighter units faster than official reports could travel. Lieutenant Franz Stiegler, a veteran pilot with JG-27, later described in post-war interviews the shock of watching experienced German pilots being shot down by what they had dismissed as clumsy American fighters. According to Stiegler's account, documented by historian Adam Makos, the sheer volume of tracer fire from P-47 formations created a visual spectacle that was both overwhelming and demoralizing. German tactical doctrine, refined through years of successful combat operations, suddenly seemed inadequate against an enemy that refused to fight according to established rules. According to Luftwaffe tactical manuals preserved in German military archives, fighter pilots were trained to engage in close-range combat, where superior marksmanship and aircraft agility determined outcomes. The Americans, however, were demonstrating that overwhelming firepower could compensate for individual tactical disadvantages. The technical advantages of the P-47's armament became increasingly apparent as German pilots accumulated combat experience against the type. According to ballistics analysis conducted by the German Air Ministry, the 50 caliber round possessed superior range and penetrating power compared to German rifle caliber machine gun ammunition. This meant that P-47 pilots could open fire at distances where German fighters couldn't effectively respond, creating tactical advantages that German pilots found increasingly difficult to counter. Major Günther Rall, whose eventual total of 275 aerial victories made him one of history's most successful fighter pilots, noted in his memoirs a fundamental shift in German tactical thinking during late 1943. According to Rall's assessment, German pilots began avoiding prolonged engagements with P-47 formations, recognizing that the American aircraft's ammunition capacity allowed for sustained combat that could exhaust German fighters' limited ammunition supplies. The high-altitude performance superiority of the P-47 created additional tactical nightmares for German interceptor pilots. According to technical specifications compiled by Republic Aviation, the Thunderbolt's turbo-supercharged engine maintained peak power output at altitudes where German fighters experienced significant performance degradation. This altitude advantage meant that P-47 formations could dictate engagement terms, attacking when circumstances favored them and breaking off when threatened. Hauptmann Walter Dahl, commanding officer of the 3rd AJG-3, documented in his unit's war diary the frustration of attempting to intercept high-flying P-47 formations. According to Dahl's reports, preserved in the German Federal Archives, German fighters often reached interception altitude, only to discover that American escorts were operating several thousand feet higher, maintaining protective coverage while remaining beyond effective German attack range. The durability demonstrations that P-47s provided during combat operations challenged fundamental German assumptions about American manufacturing quality. Combat reports from autumn 1943 documented numerous instances of Thunderbolts absorbing what should have been mission-ending damage, yet continuing to fight effectively. Oberleutnant Johannes Steinhoff recorded in his squadron diary watching a P-47 take direct hits from multiple German fighters, only to see the American aircraft complete its attack run and return safely to base. The ammunition capacity revelations created perhaps the most significant tactical adjustments in German fighter doctrine. According to Luftwaffe training modifications implemented in late 1943, pilot instruction began emphasizing ammunition conservation and engagement timing to counter American fighters' sustained firing capability. German pilots, accustomed to brief, decisive combat encounters, now faced opponents who could maintain effective fire throughout extended engagements. Major Wilhelm Batz, who would finish the war with 237 confirmed victories, described in post-war interviews the psychological pressure of engaging P-47 formations. According to Batz's account, documented by historian Tony Holmes, German pilots found themselves constantly calculating ammunition expenditure, while American fighters seemed to fire without concern for conservation. This disparity created stress factors that affected German pilot performance throughout combat encounters. The escort effectiveness of P-47 formations began generating strategic implications that extended far beyond individual combat encounters. According to analysis conducted by the US Strategic Bombing Survey, bomber losses decreased significantly when adequate P-47 escort coverage was maintained throughout mission profiles. German bomber interception strategies, previously focused on overwhelming local fighter defenses, required fundamental revision to address this new tactical reality. Oberst Adolf Galland, serving as general of the fighter arm, noted in his post-war memoirs that American escort tactics represented a paradigm shift in air warfare. According to Galland's assessment, German fighters could no longer rely on numerical superiority at specific engagement points because American escort formations maintained protective coverage throughout entire mission profiles. This tactical evolution forced German commanders to develop new approaches for engaging heavily protected bomber streams. The ground attack capabilities of P-47 formations created disruption among German transportation units by late 1944. According to Wehrmacht situation reports preserved in military archives, American fighter bombers were systematically disabling German supply convoys with decisive impact. The combination of 850 caliber machine guns, rockets, and bombs made individual P-47s capable of stopping entire truck columns or disabling locomotives with single attack runs. General Major Dietrich Peltz, commanding German close air support operations, reported to higher headquarters that American fighter-bomber attacks were severely disrupting German logistics across the Western Front. According to Peltz's assessment, documented in German military archives, P-47 formations could loiter over target areas for extended periods, targeting any German vehicles that attempted movement during daylight hours. The laughter that once echoed through German briefing rooms in summer 1943 had fallen silent by war's end. According to post-war assessments compiled by military historians, the P-47 Thunderbolt achieved what no amount of propaganda could accomplish, forcing experienced Luftwaffe pilots to acknowledge American technological and industrial superiority through tactically decisive combat performance. The aircraft they had dismissed as a flying bathtub became the hammer that helped break German air power over Europe, proving that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are those you underestimate.